but I met a team today that's doing pretty well. Like, a lot of traditional companies are being not replaced, but AI is a lot of startups are able to venture into CDG. Let's close that. I'll see this later on. This looks pretty good. Like the UI looks pretty good. I don't know what it does, but let me bookmark it, so I'll try to see it later on. What I was saying was, yeah, I see a lot of AI companies doing something like there's finally a path to become like replace or at least compete with a big tech by building something. Give Ethereum, nice. I have a lot of Ethereum. Let's see. How to prevent slip disk? Is standing desk enough? I think just activity is better. Standing desks don't really help. I think they're a little bit of a fad. Yeah. All right. Face is not visible. For the people for whom face is not visible, it's something on your side that you have to fix. I think if I share screen now, it should be visible, but I don't know. We'll start at 7:04, by the way. But yeah, I've seen this before. Okay, a few people are able to see my face, a few people aren't. So all right. Rectangle. There you go. I did ask that. Day 17 of asking Kirat to use rectangle. Let's see. I don't have the time today, but so here's the thing. Rectangle app. I'm very cautious of what apps I'm installing natively on my machine, because I have a few hot wallets on my machine. Basically, I have a bunch of private keys in this machine, and an application like this requires a lot of access on your machine. So I'm very finicky in installing machines, which is why I haven't. That's the only thing that's stopping me. I will though. Seems pretty obvious. Seems like an audited library. I don't think it'll steal my private keys, but that's why I tend to not install libraries that or projects that require a lot of access on the machine. All right, projects.100xdevs.com, everyone. I have a new track called Next.js server side, which is something we'll be going through today. Let me paste a link in the chat as well. And someone said we can pin messages. So let's see. Can you pin messages? I don't have access to pin anything here. Yeah, sorry. So I cannot pin it, but it's at the top of the chat right now. Please open this. Yeah, you'll be copying over code snippets today. So if you have this open, it'll be easy for you to copy them. It's 7:04, so we can start. Welcome everyone. Today is the backend of Next.js. What we did yesterday was a bunch of front-end stuff. Basically, how can you create components and routing in Next.js? If you missed yesterday's class, today's class will be a little bit of an uphill battle for you. So feel free to drop off and first go to yesterday's class and then come here. If you were in the yesterday's class, then today's class should be fine. The goal for today is to do some backend stuff in Next.js. As I said, Next.js is a full stack framework, and that means you can do both front-end and backend stuff there. Basically, you can create HTTP routes that return you JSON, connect to a database. And that's what we'll discuss today. After today, I think there are just two important things that are left. Number one, middlewares. Number two, authentication, which I'll try to cover in an offline video if possible. If not, then we'll do it live next week. But the goal or the hope is this week I take out two videos, one on middlewares and one on Next.auth, and then we should be good to go. That's enough for Next, but we should practice a bit more. So there are two things that you can look at after we've done these 4 lectures. That's front-end, back-end, authentication, and middleware. You can look at the code base of app.100xdevs.com, this website. This is written purely in Next.js and Prisma and Postgres, the stack that we're using. So you can start to understand a lot of things here. Can think of contributing, try to at least understand how the website is built. Of course, the schema is a little complicated. There are 10 different things, but effectively, all the code here, or most of the code here, maybe 95%, is in the stack that we're learning this week. So I would urge you to actually look at some production code after everything is learned. All right, let's get right into it. Let's kick things off with the first slide and understand about backends in Next.js. Next.js is a full stack framework. I've said this many times, going to say it again. It lets you do both front end and back end. Unlike React, you only write front end, and then you separately define your backend. We discussed this yesterday as well, but let me, whoopsie daisy. Whenever you're writing React code, or the way we have written code until now, you have one separate repository in which you have the React code. You have another repository in which you have your Node.js code or your Golang code. This sort of sends HTTP request to this guy. This is usually deployed separately. This is deployed on, an EC2 server or a GCP server. Where is this deployed? This is deployed on a CDN usually. That's the standard stack that was followed for years until server-side rendering or Next.js came into the picture. And now Next.js is very aggressively trying to become your complete framework for doing everything, which is why they provide you backend as well. So Next.js has both frontend and backend in the same code base. You deploy it together. They exist on the same machine, and you don't have to worry about separate repositories or separate deployments. This means that the same process can handle both frontends and backends. If you look at app.100xdevs.com, if you go to the / route, it gives you a bunch of frontend. But if you go to app.100xdevs.com/API/user, it returns you JSON just like a backend route does. You might not see anything here if you're not logged in, but if you are logged in on app.100xdevs.com, the same URL, and in fact, the same process in the backend, when you go to app.100xdevs.com, irrespective of what route you're going on, if you go to app.100xdevs.com/ or app.100xdevs.com/API/user, both of these requests go to the same AWS machine. In one case, it's returning HTML. In another case, it is returning JSON. In fact, it is also hitting the database in this specific second case, getting back the data from the database and returning it to the user. So single code base, single deployment, yet it is able to serve both front end and back end. That's the benefit/feature of Next.js. But what are the benefits? Single code base for your front end and back end. No CORS issues. If you remember a little bit of CORS, now both front end and back end exist on the same URL. And when they do, you don't have CORS issues. If you don't understand this point, ignore. Ease of deployment, deploy to a single code base. You don't have to independently maintain कि हाँ AWS पे I am deploying my EC2 पे I am deploying my backend, and Cloudflare and S3 पे I am deploying my front end. And if front end changes, it redeploys there. If backend changes, it redeploys there. Single code base deploys together. If you change front end, redeployment happens. Change backend, redeployment happens. That's the benefit of having the code base in a single repository. Before we proceed to backend, before we write any backend code, let's first discuss how can you hit an existing backend. If you already have a backend out there on the internet, how would your Next.js server talk to it? Before getting into next, let's recap. How does React talk to a backend server? We've discussed this a few times, so hopefully this isn't too difficult, but let's do a quick recap of how data fetching works in React. We're not building the backend. We're assuming the backend is already out there. There is a URL over here. If you go to this URL, it returns you JSON that looks like this. Name, Harkirat, email, gives you an email and gives you an address. So there is already a backend server deployed on the internet. We just want to see how can you hit this backend server? How can we write some React code today? And inside this React code, we will have a component. How does that component hit a backend server, get back the response and render it on the screen? That is what we're trying to build in this slide. Just trying to recap how React hits a backend server. Effectively, what we're building is this link right here. If you open this link, you'll see it renders a user card. It renders a card which says name Harkirat and my email. If I refresh, you first see a loader for some time. And then once the data comes back, you see this card. Where is this data coming from, Harkirat? It is coming from this specific endpoint. This data is completely hard coded. So it's not like you will see your name over here. If you hit this specific endpoint, you will also see Harkirat. I will also see Harkirat. This is just a dummy backend endpoint. How would you write the code for this? The complete code is present here on GitHub. But if you've written this already, or done all the assignments until now, I'm hoping this is very simple to understand. Okay, how can you hit a backend from React and get back the data and render it like this? The answer would be a component like this. Go through this component for a second and look at all the things that are happening, and then I'll explain it as well. But I'm hoping this is easy enough to look at what's happening here. Take 30 seconds to look at it yourself, and then I will explain. Notice we've gone an extra mile and added a loader up front. You don't need to add the loader, but we've made our website a little bit, call it snazzy, and First you see a loader only when the data comes to you, actually see the data, right? 15 more seconds, then I will explain. But if you understand use effect, if you understand components, then this should be pretty easy to understand if you understand the state variable as well, I guess. So if you understand use state and use effect, this probably is a very simple component to understand. Spinner is a black box, so don't worry about where this component is. There is a component in our code base that creates a small spinner at the middle of the screen. 10 more seconds and then I'll proceed. All right. The way I've written this code is, again, what is this component supposed to do? Build something like this. If I refresh, I see a loader, and whenever the data comes back, if I inspect, you will see a network request goes out. Whenever the network request succeeds this specific /details request, and I get back the response, I want to render it here on the screen. The way I've written it is I've defined a state variable called user data and another state variable called loading. User data is of type user, capital USER, which I had defined above. If you go through the complete code base on GitHub, you'll find it over here. So if I open the code base on GitHub, source, components, user card.tsx, I've defined an interface at the top. Okay, the user data looks something like this. Harkirat, there was address also. I don't see address here. Yes, we don't need address. We're not rendering it, so we don't have to put it in the type. Just the name and the email are enough, which is what the backend route has. I say user data as a state variable, loading as a state variable, and then I add a effect at the top. What did use effect do? If there was an empty dependency array here, it would run this code once. It would run this code on mount. Whenever the component mounts, this code runs, does a axios.get, gets the user's data and sets it on this specific object. Harkirat, the type of user was just name and email, but the backend is returning you so many things. It's returning name, email, and also address. Why is this not causing a compilation error? Why is TypeScript not complaining? If this is not obvious, that means you don't understand TypeScript very well. These checks you give to TypeScript. Ke bhai, user ki shape looks like this only. At runtime, if something else comes, TypeScript cannot complain about it. TypeScript doesn't even run at runtime. It's JavaScript, which is why the type here is a smaller type and it still works. If you don't understand it, it's fine. You can feel free to ignore or convert this into an any. The goal for this slide is to understand, even in JavaScript, how would you write this component? How would you write a website that looks something like this for the people who just joined? First a loader, then a card. You send out a request on mount, and whenever data comes back, you set them on these state variables. So loading gets set to false, which means the page isn't loading anymore. And user data gets set to whatever response you get back. And then if loading is true, which means initially loading is true, you see the spinner. Whenever loading becomes false, whenever this line of code runs, the component re-renders and the actual card renders. This is how data fetching works in React. This is how we have built components many times in React. Even the blogging website that we had created, when you go to the /blogs page, it does something similar. There's a loader initially, and then eventually you see a bunch of blogs. The backend is down right now, which is why you don't, but you get the idea. Is this clear? If you don't understand this, then things from here are going to be very hard. But I'm assuming if you know React, this is pretty straightforward. How would you create a card component like this? 93% is great. So let's proceed. Just to quickly recap one more time, the data flow goes like this. You first hit this URL is incorrect. You hit whatever weak for this specific URL. You get back index.html. Then you ask for a JavaScript file. You get back the JavaScript file. Then you hit not API v1 blocks. You hit the user endpoint, and then you get back the data, and then you actually render it. That's the three sort of waterfall steps that happen. Let's go to the next slide. How do you do the same thing in Next.js? You might be like, Harkirat, I'll do the same thing. Next.js is what? Next.js is React only in the end. So I will just define a component similar to this, and then I will fetch the data like this, just like React is doing it. You can do that, but what do you miss out on when you do that? You miss out on the server side rendering parts of Next.js. The reason to use Next.js is when you hit the server for the first time, when you ask for the index.html. If this is your next server and this is the user's browser, when you send the request, you want the thing that's coming back from the server, specifically the HTML that's coming back, to be hydrated, to have Harkirat and Harkirat at gmail.com in the HTML itself. You don't want the first HTML request comes back, then I send another request, then I send another request, and then I put it on the DOM. You want the initial request itself to give you back the data. You want something like this. You want the browser sends a request, कि भाई give me index.html data, give me the user's card page, and the server talks to the backend, the Next.js server. Again, this we are doing assuming there is a separate backend that already exists. So when the request comes, the Next.js server talks to the other backend, gets the data, puts it in the HTML and returns it to the user. This is how we want to do data fetching. We want to do data fetching on the server. We want the Next.js server to talk to the backend server. Next.js is a framework that does server-side rendering. That is exactly what we are doing here. When the user asks for this page, we want कि भाई first we will get the data from the backend on the next server, put the data in HTML, return it to the user. Question is, how can you do that? How can you do data fetching on the server itself so that you don't have to worry about doing this on the client? You don't have the water falling problem. You should fetch the user's details on the server side and pre-render the page before sending it to the user. You should pre-render the page here before you send it to the user. Let's try to build this together. Let's see how you would build something like this in Next. How do you do data fetching in Next? First thing you have to do is initialize a Next application. So would urge you to try it locally with me. If not, you want to chill, that's fine, because this is fairly simple. But slowly we will be building this into a complex application. So if you want to follow along, now is the time. If you want to just look at it, that's fine as well. If you want to follow along though, initialize an empty Next.js application. npx create next app at the rate of latest. I'm going to call it week 14 to live, and then just keep pressing enter. You can select the default options for all of them. This took a lot of time for some people yesterday, so I'll wait 2 minutes before I proceed. But after it happens, open this specific folder wherever you've cloned it in Visual Studio Code. We'll wait for 1.5 minutes before I proceed. I know a few people, it takes some time to clone. So time to chill. Any questions? I'll open chat. We'll restart in like a minute or so, 1.5 minutes, I guess. Will this lead to more merge conflicts for devs? You could, not really. The backend code is very separate. It's written in separate files. Frontend is written in separate files. Doesn't matter. It's equal amount of merge conflicts. Sir, issue I've created is not being assigned on CMS. Then just proceed with it. The rule of thumb is if you don't get assigned for 2 days, then you do it. Oh wow. I will have to look at this after the class, but last question answer is we're doing Bangalore probably mid of this month. Hi, I'm trying to stick to questions related to the class for now. We'll do an AMA at the end, or like whatever FAQs. All right, 30 more seconds and then we'll proceed, guys. Just try to initialize an empty Next.js application on your machine. And then maybe do the next step as well if it just worked for you. $15 more seconds. All right. For the people for whom it's not yet cloned, it will happen initially and then just follow all the steps from here to here. I'm just going to, do the same here. There's nothing, you can just copy and paste them. So it shouldn't take you too long whenever it happens. If you've done that, you should see an empty Next.js application here. The first thing to do always is to clean it up. What do I mean by clean it up? go to app.tsx, or sorry, page.tsx, the app/page.tsx, the first route that renders when you go to the landing page, and clean it up. Just like in React, we used to clean it up. Here also, remove all the default code that they give you in page.tsx, or specifically app/page.tsx, remove it all and replace it with a simple div that says hi there. And the same for global.css. So go to global.css and remove everything below Tailwind. Keep these Tailwind classes, everything else remove from the code base. Take 30 more seconds. What all do you have to do? Global.css, remove all the extra CSS. Page.tsx, remove everything here. Maybe start the process, and also make sure you see hi there on your screen. So npm run dev to start the process, then make sure it actually works. Let me quickly recap the steps. Number 1, clone the repository locally. Command to run is npx create next app at the rate of latest, and then keep pressing enter again and again. Then open the repository in Visual Studio Code, then clean up page.tsx, clean up global.css, run npm run dev, and make sure you see an empty website locally. Just bootstrapping a simple Next.js application. Are you good to go? Shall we proceed? Hoping the answer is yes. Cool. So, what do we want to do? We want to build a similar website, but in Next.js. We want a similar card website, but we want to follow this pattern. Whenever the request comes, from the backend, we want to send a request and get back the response. By backend, I mean from the Next.js server. The way to do that is, if you go to the next step right here, you don't need to clear layout.tsx, just app.tsx and the CSS file. Next up, install Axios, the library that we're using to hit a backend server. So npm install Axios is the next step. And then define a function that actually hits the backend. We wrote this function in the last slide as well, but we wrote it in the component. In the component, we were writing an Axios.get inside a use effect. Now write the same thing here, but in a function in page.tsx. I repeat, in page.tsx itself, in the top level page handler that we have here, either paste this function or write it yourself, doesn't matter. It just does an Axios.get, gets all the data from here and returns it to whoever is calling it. Very simple function. If you want to write it yourself, you can. If you want me to write it, I can write it myself as well. Import Axios from Axios. So import this library, async function, get user data. All right, just write a function like this that actually hits the backend. We're not calling the function yet, just describing the function. And make sure the URL is correct. Breathe in for the next 10 seconds because something new, interesting, and very mind-boggling is coming in the next 10 seconds. So after you've written all of this code, breathe for a second, and then you're going to see something very counterintuitive on the screen. It felt very counterintuitive to me also the first time I saw it. Make this component async. Harkeet, this is a component, which means a function that returns a div or some HTML. You are saying make this an async function. Yes, make this an async function. You are saying create an async component. Yes, create an async component with me. Harkeet, do they even work? is there a concept of an async component? Not in React, not in Next also for the longest time, but now very recently, Next supports asynchronous components, which basically means you can actually do asynchronous operations at the top of your component. I can write something like const user details equal to await get user data. I can write code like this and it will not complain. Can you do the same in React? No, you cannot. React does not have, unless something recently was introduced recently, React has no concept of an asynchronous component, but Next.js lets you now at least define asynchronous components only in server components. I repeat, if this was a client component, then you cannot do this. If this is running on the server, which means the default component, then you can write code like this, and then you can simply be like user details dot email and user details dot name. This looks very counterintuitive to look at the first time, especially if you've done React for years. If you've done React for years, this might feel very weird. If you have not done it, then you might not find it as weird. But asynchronous components are a thing, and this is the, believe it or not, the standard way to now create components and do data fetching in Next.js. If you want to ever fetch data and then use that data in a component, you fetch it at the top of your component like this. Do you understand the syntax? %, good, not great. Let's try to run it. Let's experiment with it a bit and then we'll recap it again. Let's try to run it locally. npm run dev. If I open this, I see, hi there, Harkirat at gmail.com, Harkirat. Notice one thing. If I click on inspect and open the network tab and refresh, the very first index.html that comes back, it has Harkirat at gmail.com. It has Harkirat. I have server side rendered the component. I have followed this specific architecture. Okay, my browser sent a request and my server got the data, put it in the HTML and returned it back to the user. If you look at the code again, what does the code do? It says anytime a request comes to this page.tsx, anytime the home function wants to be called, I will first fetch all the user details on the server. This is a server component, which means these details are being fetched from here on the server and then being rendered, which means being put here and then being returned to the end client. This is how we are doing server side rendering. We are not going through the whole waterfalling process. And if you look at it, this component is 100 times cleaner than all the code we had written for React. This was the React code that does the same thing. This is the Next.js code now that does the same thing. You get the user's details and you render them. If you look at the website, it does work like you would expect it to work. Do we understand asynchronous functions, but more specifically, asynchronous components in in Next.js? %, good, not great. Let's see what else this slide has to offer. Prettify the UI. So let's quickly prettify the UI, which basically means I've already written a bunch of CSS, copy it and paste it here. And then let me open chat for just a minute and try to answer some questions. Or maybe just post your question in Q&A if you're stuck. And for everyone else, just prettify the UI a bit, make sure it looks very similar to, the original UI. For the people who have some specific questions, please, shouldn't we fetch data in recoil selector for editing feature? Yes, that's the whole point, right? Okay, should you put this in recoil? You cannot do that very well on the server, which is why if you want to use recoil, then this might not be the best architecture. But you don't need recoil very well you probably don't need it here because it's such a simple component. When you do, then it will be a little bit harder for you to do these things on the server. That's a good question. Why can't we do async in React? React does not support. It was not written to do things like these. This is just a new pattern, a new architecture that Next.js thought ki this is a great way to do, rendering. Instead of async components, can't we use get server side props? That was how things were done before Next 13. You used get server side props and put the data into these props. This is the fresh way to do it. You can do that as well. We have covered that in the last cohort. I am happy to put video is already there. But this is the fresh, brand new Next 14 right out of the oven way to do it. How do we do state management is something we will cover this week. Not too difficult. Basically, you have to convert it into a client component, I feel, if you want to, take this and put it into a state variable. So it's a little dilly-dally how you use state management, but we'll cover it. How to show loading in Next.js? Very good question. That's exactly what we will cover next. So let's try to move to the next slide and try to cover. Okay, Harkirat, loader to we didn't put the original React website first had a loader, then had this. But your localhost 3000, the next application that we have created, there is no loader. In fact, you should have had a question over here, Harkirat, okay, what happens if this takes a long time? This is a backend request. What if this backend request takes 20 seconds? What if, let me add a artificial delay here. So this line adds an artificial delay. How it does, some of you might already understand. We discussed this. This is like a not making the thread sleep, but pausing execution for 5 seconds and then proceeding here. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to simulate what if this function took a really long time, let's say 5 seconds or more. How would this Next.js application change? If I go here and press enter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now the actual request went, and then you see it. So what's the problem here? The problem is during this time that the request is going out, the user sees nothing. Ideally, the user should see a loader, which is something that someone asked in the chat as well. So how do you add a loader here? How do you make sure the user at least gets back the loader, and you don't make them wait for such a long time and keep them stuck? And the answer is something that Next now provides you out of the box, which again is an opinionated thing. Just how layout.tsx is opinionated, page.tsx is opinionated. Another thing that Next.js team has an opinion on is that bhai, whatever route you think is going to get stuck, add a loading.tsx there. If you know, there are operations at the top of the component that are going to take a long time. While they are rendering, while they are being fetched, loading.tsx is what will render. I repeat, during the time that this await call is happening, loading.tsx will get whatever is rendered here is what will get called. So if I export default function, something like this, if I create a fresh file, call it loading.tsx and export a function over here that says loading, Next.js will render this until this page actually loads, until this await operation executes. So if this is stuck for 10 seconds, you will see a loader for 10 seconds. Let's see if that actually happens though. If I go back here and refresh, for a very brief second, you see loading over here. If I add back the artificial delay, so if I go back here and add back the artificial delay that was here, now for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many seconds, you see loading, and then you see the actual card. So this is something you probably want when you know an operation is going to take a long time. Specifically, you have an asynchronous operation at the top. There's also some code to prettify the loader, which feel free to copy that, so that you have a slightly cleaner loader. But do we understand the significance? Oopsie daisy. There you go. Loading ... and then the actual page. Do we understand the significance of loading.tsx? It also provides you a bunch of other files. So this is just loading.tsx, layout.tsx, and page.tsx are just 3 files. There are other files that you can put here that have some significance. But these are the sort of the pet ones that you should know of, or / you will use most often when you're creating your website. do we understand the significance of loading.tsx? Can you create it in every subroute? Yes. If you have a different route /blogs/ something, and that has an operation that will be asynchronous at the top of the file, then over there you will do it, so on and so forth. All right, cool. 88%, good, not great. We will proceed either way, but I will take questions at the end, so feel free to defer questions until the end. 88% is good for us to proceed. Loaders in Next is done. Let me quickly recap everything we have discussed in today's class. Number one, Next.js is not just for front end, but also for backends. We haven't reached backends yet, but you can use Next.js for writing a backend of your own. Number two, recap of data fetching. We understood how data fetching happens in React, and this was the answer. Then we understood how data fetching happens in Next. Specifically, if you want to defer all the server-side rendering, if you want to make sure, okay, all the backend calls happen here on the Next.js server, and then you finally return something to the user. Then finally, we learned about loaders or skeletons in Next.js, how you can use them to render some basic data on the screen until the actual data comes back. Step 5, introducing API routes in Next.js. Now is when we'll actually write some backend code, how we'll understand okay, why you do not need Express anymore, why do you do not need Cloudflare workers anymore, how can you write real backends in Next.js. Next.js lets you write backend routes just like Express does. This is why Next.js is considered to be a full stack framework and not just, a front-end framework. The benefits of using Next for backend include code in a single repository, both front-end and backend exist in the same repository. All standard things that you get in a backend framework. Yeah, I don't know if this is a benefit, but basically you can create HTTP routes, get the headers, get the body, return the response, connect to the database, all that jazz. Server components can directly talk to the backends. This is a point that will eventually come, feel free to ignore for now. But the component that we had written here, as you saw right here, it directly was able to hit another backend. Similarly, if you write your own backend code, you can sort of talk to it directly over here, but we'll get there when we get there. So that's what we'll understand next. We'll understand how can you write backend in a Next.js application. Let's move the backend into our own application. Right now, we had a Cloudflare backend that we were using, this specific route right here, week 13 offline.keyrtechnologies.worker.dev. This code was written on cloud or deployed on Cloudflare workers, written as a written as an independent backend project. Now we will try to write the same thing in our Next.js application. We want to introduce a route that returns a hard-coded user value for now. We're basically creating the same thing, this specific endpoint that returns a hard-coded name and email. Eventually, we'll see how you can connect to the database, do 10 different things. For now, just creating a simple route that returns email harkirat@gmail.com and name, whatever your name might be, or my name, doesn't matter. Introduce a new folder called API. So here comes a convention to follow. If you want to return JSON from your backend, if you want to, or even text from your backend, if you want to create a backend route handler, you will create it inside the API folder. Again, an opinion that the Next.js team has. Okay, if you want to write backend routes in Next 13, again, all of this is Next 13. Even in Next, like the old pages router, you had to create an API folder. Today, also the most modern thing that Next.js advertises is if you want to write backend code, first create an API folder. So that's the thing we have to do next. Inside app, create an API folder. Again, these are all opinions that we have to follow. If you are using Next.js, you have to follow what opinions they have. That is why it's considered to be a highly opinionated framework. Okay, if you want to write backend code, you write it over here. All right. Inside API is when you start to create your folder structure. If I want to create a user route, then I will have to create a user folder over here. And then inside this user folder, rather than adding page.tsx, I will add route.ts. I repeat, do not add page.tsx. This is no longer a page. This is what? This is a route handler, and hence you have to write route.ts, or the name of the file needs to be route.ts. Harkirat, is this the standard folder structure? Yes. Harkirat, can you show me in a different repository? Yes. If you go to code100x/cms, if you go to source app, you'll see there's an API folder. If you go to API, you will see all the backend routes that we have. If you remember in the beginning of the class, I showed you this specific route, app.100xdevs.com/API/user. The code of this resides where? It resides in app/API/user/route.ts. So this is the folder structure to follow when you're creating your backend of your application. All right. Cool, Harkirat. Let's try to complete the assignment. The assignment was return a simple username password. And again, the convention to follow or the opinion to follow here is, okay, they say if you want to create a get handler for /API/user, you have to export a function called get, which does all your database logic, and then eventually returns a response, which can be JSON, can be string, be new response, which will have username Harkirat and email Harkirat and name. I'm missing something here. Response.json. This is how you would write a route handler. Harkirat, how do I get the headers? How do I get the body? You get a request object over here. You can use this request object to get the body, the headers, the query parameters. We don't need any of them, which is why I haven't written them. Eventually we will need them, and then we'll use the request object as well. This is how to write a route handler in Next. How do you write it in Express? You write a app.get /API/user, something like this. This is how you would have written the same thing in Express. And this is how you will write the same thing in Next.js. You will, rather than defining this as a string, you will create an API folder inside which you will create a user folder, inside which you'll write route.ts. And then here you will export a get or a post or a put or a delete based on what method this specific function handles. Let's try to run it. Let's see if it works, and then I'll open the poll one more time. So save this and then rerun npm run dev. And if I go to /API/user, I see some hard coded data. Eventually we'll do 10 different things, but do we understand this much? Do we understand the thing that I showed you initially? Okay, the backend cannot just serve front end. It can also serve backend routes as well, like return JSON data, text data, and connect to a database, all that jazz. Let me open the code one more time. This is the code that I've written. API/user/route.ts exports a get function. If I want to write a post handler, I can write post over here. And now if I go to Postman and quickly try to send a post request to localhost :3000/API/user. It returns me the same thing. If I try to send a put request, it will say route doesn't exist or 4 or 5 method not found. But if I export a put over here and then send it, then it does work. So this is how you create your route handlers. 10 different things we need to understand. How do you create a middleware? How do you do authentication? How do you get body? How do you get headers? We'll get there. But do we understand how to write backend routes for now? We good to go? Great. So 91% is great. Let's proceed to slide number 6. Let's move the backend into our own. Oh, sorry, this is done. Let's proceed to. Oh yeah. The one thing we've missed is now let's make the front end talk to it. Let's say we want the front end to now talk to our own backend. We don't want it to talk to the Cloudflare worker. So what change do you have to make? Go to page.tsx and just replace this with your own route, which is http://localhost :3000/API/user. This is wrong. This is not the right pattern. We'll eventually fix this. But for now, just send a get request. And then when you refresh, it should just work. Happens very quickly. There's no loader as well. Do we understand this? can like just made the client side code change. I'm assuming it's straightforward, so I'm not going to go deeper into it. This is wrong for a few reasons. I can give you a gist of why this is wrong, but you will eventually fix it. It is wrong because you're sending a request from the Next.js server back to the Next.js server. What am I doing when I write http:/3000/API/user? The user sends me a request and I send another HTTP request to get the data, and then I respond back to the user. I could have simply returned username password here, but we'll eventually fix this. So don't worry if you don't understand why this is bad. This is great. We have a basic full stack application working in Next.js. Next up, we'll understand and create a real front end for a sign up page. What have we done? We have created this page right here, the card page, but the user is hard coded. We need the user to be actually signed up. We need a database where all the data needs to be stored. So next thing is that we're going to create a sign up page, but it's 7:47 and I want to make sure this seems like a heavy class to me at least. So should we take a break? Yes or no? And if we take one, we'll take it until 8 p.m. Should we take a break? Yes or no? I'll open chat in case we do take a break. Pretty mediocre result, but so let's restart at 7:55. So that's a 7-minute break, and I'm going to open chat until then. If you want to drop off, don't want to take a break. The things that we'll discuss after this will be writing some more code. The important thing we'll discuss is how do you introduce databases, Prisma, and then server actions. These are the two big things you will miss if you don't want to attend the rest of the class. You can come back to the video if it feels slow. Databases and server actions. Everything else is just practice. So if you want to drop off, feel free to. If you want to just take a break, that's fine as well. I'm going to open chat. All right, a lot of questions. How do we know if website is using Next.js? Oof, that is a good question. Yeah, so this is how I try to reverse engineer websites. Let's say I have a competitor. I want to look at their website. Let's say, what's a good full stack website? LinkedIn.com. If I want to see what are they doing, I'll go here, click on inspect, click on network. The way to usually reverse engineer any website is, okay, what are their API routes? Where do they get all these posts from? Is there a API /API/posts endpoint here that they're hitting? And if I can find no such endpoint, it means they're doing server-side rendering, which means they're either using Next or some other server-side rendering framework. That's how you would figure out if a website is using React or not. If they're using React, then you will find a post request here to /API/posts that returns all of this in a JSON format. If you cannot find that, that means they're doing server-side rendering. Notion doc. To write backend code, we only need, to write backend code, we only need to create route.tsx file, and a folder is not necessary to be created API. The only condition that, yes, exactly, that is true. It is convention for this to be /API. But even if I create this over here, let's say I do a app/random/user route.ts, and inside which this, if I write the same thing, if I restart, now if I go to the /random route, it does return me this. So it is just convention for it to be API/user. You can define it in a separate folder as well, as long as it is route.ts. If it is page.tsx, then it's a front end. It will be interpreted as a front end. If it is random, if it is route.ts, then it will be interpreted as a backend. Good call out. Off topic. If we work remotely, then should we invest fully in crypto and make our investment independent? Pretty off topic here. I don't know. No, I mean, depends on you. If you want to do, I don't have a good answer. No financial advice here. So what's the difference between actual server backend where our Node.js code is written and server for SSR and Next.js? They're going to be on the different hosts. Like we Node.js run this thing and React.js run this thing, CDN. Can you please explain it once with the help of a diagram? How does it work? So what's the difference between actual, okay. How does a React application get deployed? Number one, if this is your GitHub code, over here, you will have two folders, one called frontend, another called backend. This will have your Node.js code, This will have your React code. You will take this React code, you will put it, you will run npm run build on it. It will give you, go down a bit. You will take the React code, let's say on your local machine for now. You will run npm run build on it, and it will give you some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. You will take these final files, not this. You will take these final files and put them on, let's say, S3. This is how we've discussed to do deployment in the AWS class. Once you have put this code on S3, you will create a CDN, which means in case of AWS, a CloudFront distribution. You will get back a URL that looks like abc.cloudfront.net, and you will tell the distribution, this is the place where you will find your HTML, CSS files. Now, if anyone comes to this URL, they will hit the CDN. If the CDN has that file cached, it will return it as such. If not, it will go to S3, find the file, and return it to the user. So the front end is independently deployed. If this is the world map, the front end is deployed in a bunch of, where it's deployed in a single S3 store, but there are a bunch of cloud fronts or bunch of CDNs that actually serve the front end. This is just the front end. The back end, go back up a bit. I said GitHub has two things, front end and back end. How do you deploy back end? It's a simple, let's say, Node.js application. You can deploy it on a single machine, let's say here in the US, by running node index.js, let's say. So your backend runs over here independently. Front end is sort of deployed all over the world. Can you scale backend? Yes, you can put backend in 10 different places, auto scale it, all that jazz. To kick things off simply, you have it in a single place. Whenever a user comes to your front end, they get it from a CDN. When they get the front end, they send a bunch of backend requests to this server over here. Okay, by what are the posts that exist on LinkedIn? What is my user details? So on and so forth. That is how backend deployment happens and front end deployment happens. Next.js, the deployment is very similar to the backend part of a React plus Node application. Just how you had deployed the backend over there, you would almost similarly deploy Next, because the Next is effectively running an HTTP server only. This is why I keep saying you cannot really distribute this via a CDN, because Next.js, even though you can think of it as an HTTP server, only it has a special property. It doesn't just return JSON, it also returns HTML. So it's effectively an HTTP server. You deploy it just like you deploy any other backend application, which means you can either deploy it on an EC2 machine here, but what is the popular way? You deploy it on what are called edge networks, which means very similar to CDNs, only these don't cache a lot of requests, because every user might have a different set of posts they see. If I go to LinkedIn and I get back all of these posts, I don't want someone else to get the same posts, which is why you don't really cache data in case of Next. All right, that's a long answer to your question. How is server client side? How is it server client side? How to describe? Let me get to that. What 100x devs front end back end are the same machine? Let's say EC2. What about databases? Good question. Hydration I'll discuss this week. Databases are not on the same machine. For most applications, you should almost always forever. If this is the world map, one more time. If this is the world map, you can deploy your application over here. If it goes down, it's fine. If the server itself destroys, it's fine. You bring it back up in an hour. If your database is deployed over here, right? In case the server goes down, the file system gets lost, you're pretty much screwed. So usually almost 99%, you will never self-host your database. You will use either Neon, something called RDS that AWS gives you, or you will use, AVN or whatever. You'll use a third-party service who's having a lot of replication to make sure your data doesn't get lost. So for 100x devs also, and generally also, you try your best. Firstly, the database will be deployed completely separately. Secondly, you don't necessarily usually deploy it yourself. you give it to someone else to deploy. That's how you deploy databases. All right. Let's have a time here. So let's proceed. But again, we'll happily take questions at the end. We don't have too much. We have a lot to cover, but let's try to cover as much as we can by 45, and then I'll open it for questions. All right. Cool. We have written a get endpoint, and we have hit that endpoint from the front end as well, or the component as well. So we have some version of full stack right now. Let me go over the code one more time. What does the code look like? A top level page.tsx. What does it do? It returns a simple card which renders the name and the email of the user, and it fetches all the user's details from the same server by hitting an API endpoint, API/user. Where is the handler for this? It's currently in API/user/route.ts. It's a simple get handler that returns some hard coded value. What do we see by the end? We see a card like this on the screen. First we see loading, then we see the card. Next up, let's create the front end for something that actually goes to a database. Let's write a simple application that gives you a sign up page where you put your details and they finally reach a database. That's what we need to do next. So first thing you have to do, create a front end for your sign up page. So simple card that, gives you a username field, a password field, and a button. For that, discussed this yesterday. Try to code it yourself if you're coding along. What do you have to do? Create a folder called sign up, inside which you add a page.tsx file, which exports a default function that returns, 2 input boxes. This is a very ugly basic sign up page. Take your time and write it. I'm going to give you guys a minute to do it. You can also copy it from the slides. There's a very pretty one that I've already written here. So if you want, you can copy this. If not, you can write it yourself. I would just copy it. Take 30 seconds to write it, but then let's structure it a bit better. So yeah, take 20 seconds to write it like this maybe, and then we'll structure it a little bit better. We'll create a separate components folder. There are a few reasons for it. That's what I've written here in slides. Let's follow the slides. You can write it here as well completely, but eventually we have to, if you might remember, convert this into a client component, and you can convert this into a client component, but let's not do that. Let's create a separate component where we write all of this. So after you've written an ugly version like this, take 10 more seconds, write this ugly version, then we'll try to structure it a little better. If you've written the ugly version already, try to open it in the browser and make sure it works. Username field, password field, and a sign up button. All right. Now, what you can do is create a separate components folder inside which you can have signup.tsx. This will just help you structure better. This is something we discussed yesterday. It's generally a decent idea to, put your sign up component or generally all components in a separate components folder. I've already written a very pretty version, so you can copy it from the slides. If you go to the 7th slide, you will find a toggle that says code, create component/signup.tsx, and then code. You can just copy this code and paste it here. This is a very simple component for a sign up card. I'm going to wait for 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and then I'll proceed. All right, now that you've created this signup.tsx component, use it directly over here rather than, writing all the logic over here. Import signup from @/component/signup and use it over here. Just structure your project a little bit better. I'll give you guys 10 seconds. if you chose the default imports, it's fine. Just, use // that's fine. If you want to fix it, you can fix it by adding this in tsconfig.json, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. All right. Step 1, create the component. Step 2, convert this signup.tsx into a client component. Why? Because it will have a button on click handler. So you need to make sure this is a client component, else you will see an error. Step 3, add the on click handler. Let me take a pause here. Feels like I said a lot of things too quickly in this specific slide. Are we doing good, or shall we pause? We can take it slow. We can just do less. We can do offline. Yeah, we're not doing good, right? Yeah. It's what I felt as well. So let's take a breather here. I think too many things happen too quickly. So let's open chat and let's, try to breathe for a second. We'll reinitialize the whole project and do everything again. Take a pause over here. It's okay. We have another hour. We also have more, offline videos. Cover it in more structured fashion. It's fine. All right. Bunch of questions. Repeat. Yes, we will repeat. We'll go from the top, but let's talk for 5 minutes. Again, if this feels a little too casual, then feel free to drop off. You will have the recording. I'll also cover everything from here in an offline video. So whatever we're covering from here, I will recover in an offline video. I think the class is going a little dilly-dally. All right. Let me answer some random questions, some basic questions. Check Q&A. That's a good point. Let's check Q&A. Design versus development. Great question. I'm going to answer these until 8:05 and then we will restart from the top. We'll write everything from the top. All right. Development versus design ka answer is you probably want to do only development. It's a decent job opening though if you know design well. So design versus development is not the worst thing in the world if you want to, be hired as a niche engineer. All right. Cool. One more question let me take. I'm checking Q&A by the way. Explain the current file structure. I will write the current file structure from the top next. So, you can follow along one more time. One posted doubts. How microservices architecture is done in Next? It is a monolith, unfortunately. Everything is in the single repository deployed together. There is no microservice. Yeah, Next.js is not the most microservice friendly framework. How will you deploy Next.js application to Kubernetes in a pod to complete pod to front end and back end? How is it? You would deploy a Next.js application just like you would deploy any Node.js application on Kubernetes. There's nothing extra you have to do. It's just a server that's running, right? Only it's returning you some HTML, CSS from time to time. All right. We took a breather. What did we discuss today? We are learning about Next.js, and forget everything I told from the beginning. We are just trying to create a simple sign up page for now. So we can understand databases. We can understand how you can create a sign up page that takes some data from the user, puts it in a database. For that, let's reinitialize the next repository. Let's go from the top and try to create a fresh repository. Step number 1 is npx create next app @latest, which means create a fresh Next.js application. Press enter. I'm going to call it week 14 one more time. And then select the default options. For the person who hadn't selected imports, this is your time to select, aliases over here. Going to open it in Visual Studio Code as well. All right. Fresh, empty Next.js project has nothing right now. Global.css, clean everything up. Page.tsx, clean everything up. That's step 2. Oh. Yup. Wasn't sharing my screen, was I? Sorry about that. Cool. Let me look at Q&A. People were telling me. Sorry about that. All right. What did I do? Step number 1, created a empty Next.js application, npx create next app at the rate of latest, a fresh empty application. Do this number 1. Number 2, clean up page.tsx and global.css. Make sure you have a very basic application running, which you have high there. Okay, 30 seconds. Do this quickly and then we'll proceed. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to create a sign up page that's able to put data in a database. That's all. Twenty more seconds. All right. If you did everything right, you should see a sign up page that looks something like this. Sorry, you should see a empty hi there page. Next up, we want to create a sign up page that the user can come to. For that, first you have to create a sign up folder, inside which you have to create a page.tsx file. So this sign up folder / page.tsx file are the next steps, creating a very basic sign up page. And this should export a default function which will return a sign up component that we will define very soon. All right, that's step number 2, creating app /signup /page.tsx and exporting a default function over there that returns a sign up component that we will render very soon. Next up, create a global components folder inside which you create signup.tsx, and over here copy the code from the Notion slide so you have a very basic sign up page. If you want to create it yourself, you can do that as well. You can export function signup, which returns a div which has an input box, a bunch of buttons, and a few state variables like username and password. So you can create this yourself, or there's a very pretty one already available in week 7, point number 1. This one right here, the code over here. So you can just copy this over and paste it here. Going to wait for 5 seconds. Oh, not 5 seconds. I'm going to wait for 30 seconds until you write this component and import it in page.tsx. All right. Take 30 seconds. Have a basic sign up page on your side. So if you go to localhost /3000 /signup, one more thing you have to do is make this use client. I forgot that. There you go. Make sure you have a use client at the top of signup.tsx, else it will give you the same error that we saw yesterday. This needs to be a client component because we're using use state over here. All right. 20 more seconds and then I'll proceed. I'll take you through this component, how it is written, what it is doing, and then eventually we'll try to build up to how you can take this data and put it in a database. 10 more seconds and then we'll proceed. All right, let's look at this sign up component. What does it do? Number 1, it defines 2 state variables, username and password. Then it has a bunch of styling to make it very pretty. Then it has 2 inputs, a username input and a password input. Anytime they change, we set the username state variable or the password state variable. So these 2 get populated based on what is being put in this labeled input. If I go over here and type ASD or something here, these values reach these state variables. Finally, on the button click, what do we want? We want a request to go out to a backend server. We want to send a HTTP request. So here is where you have to, number 1, import Axios. So run npm install Axios. And number 2, send a post request over here. Axios.post http://localhost:3000/API/user, let's say. Make sure you're importing Axios on the top of your file as well. After use client, make sure you have use client over here. When we are sending the request, we need to send the username and password in the body as well. The server needs to get the username and password and actually, put them in the database. So make sure you're sending this data along. Cool. Write this much code and then we'll proceed. What have I done? Written a basic component which has a username and password field that are being populated by these inputs. And then when you click the button, a request goes out. If I save this, if I go here, refresh, make sure it's running, and then refresh. If I go to the network tab, put some data here, and I click on sign in, it should say sign up. I see a request that goes out to /API/user. There's no handler there, which is why we see 404. But if you look at the payload, I am sending the right things to the backend. What do we have to do next? We have to define the backend route handler. So API/user should have a post handler next. How can we do that? app/API/user/route.ts. If you want to write any backend route, you have to create a route.ts file. And where do I want this route to exist? On /API/user. So I created an API folder, inside which I created a user folder, inside which I created a route.ts file. Here, I export a function called post, which now we need the request object for this. And the type of this is next request, which comes from next/server. And here I need to somehow extract the body and then finally store the body in the database and then return to the user. Response.json message, you are logged in. This is what we want, right? For now, since we don't have a database, let's just extract the body. The way to do that here is body equal to await rec.json. Make sure this is an async function. And then let's just log the body to make sure it is reaching the server. Eventually we will put this data in the database, but let's try to just log the body and make sure it actually reaches the server. Cool. Try to write this code. Take 30 seconds. Let me paste it in chat as well, although it's very hard to copy from chat from what I know. Where is this code hosted? It's in API/user/route.ts. Use router is giving an error. So if you are importing it from the wrong place, you need to import it from next/navigation. You're importing it from next/whatever. But we've not reached there. Give me 10 seconds. We'll reach there very soon. All right. 10 more seconds, then we'll proceed. Let's make sure this actually works. When you send a request, you get back this message. You see the body being logged on the server. So open this on the right, open the sign up page on the left. And let's try to send the sign in request, whatever, sign up request with some dummy data in there. When I click on sign in, I do see a log on the server that says username and password. And if I look at the network tab over here, you will see the request that went out does get back a response that says you are logged in. So do we understand how you can merge the route on this button handler? Is this part straightforward? How to create a sign-in page where at least the data from here reaches this handler and you get that in the body. We need to put it in the database, but do we understand creating backend routes and attaching them to on-click handlers. So it's not great. It's 80%. Repeat. Okay, let me repeat one more time. Let me just go through the slides on the left. What did the slide say? The slide said, सबसे पहले, first of all, create app/signup/page.tsx. I created a file over here in app/signup/page.tsx. What does this file do? It exports a default function which renders a sign up component. That is what the slides said as well. Create a simple page that imports sign up and then renders it. Question is, we haven't created this. Yes, that's exactly what the next point says. The next point says create components/signup.tsx. So I created the components folder inside which I added the signup.tsx file. If you look at the signup.tsx file, I said paste all of this code over there. This is a very simple, pretty looking sign up card which stores in username and password whatever you put in these inputs. If you go over here and type something, this value gets stored in this username and password from this on change handler. If you don't understand this part, go to the blogging website code where we actually wrote this specific sign up page. And lastly, I have a button whose on click handler I defined in the next one and said button on click, send a backend request to /API/user, and then created a route handler in the next slide. So if you go to the next slide, I said go to API/user/route.ts and create a simple backend handler, which is something I did over here. App API route.ts, created a simple post handler. Okay, whenever the request comes, just log it over here and return this message back to the user. Don't do anything extra. Don't put anything in the database. A very simple backend route handler. Is the recap making it a little more clearer? Okay, good. 88% is good. Again, not great, but it will take questions at the end. We only have 2 more slides until databases. I guess 1 more slide, which is a long slide. Let's finish that and then I'll open it up for questions. Let's try to put this data into a real database. Then everything else I'll cover in an offline video. Databases, the most important part. Given you have a backend route, forget how we hit the backend route, forget the front end. Given we have this backend route, how can you put data from here into a database? For that, number one, we have a bunch of dummy routes and everything. Number one, you need to get a Postgres database. Now here also, if you don't already have one, this will be problematic. Take 2 minutes, go to either avian.io, aiven.io, or go to neon.tech and create a simple Postgres database. I already have one running over here. If you don't, the way to do that is click on create service, select Postgres, select free over here, and then create one. It doesn't let me because I already have one, but create a simple Postgres database. You need a database where you will actually put the data, right? So get one really quickly. I'll open chat until then. Get a database, only then we can proceed from here. Chat is open if you have any questions. Harkiyat, we have async component, then do we really need API routes? We don't need API routes. We do need API routes for things like sign up. For example, when you click on this button, then there is no async component, cannot do anything. Right? Async component is for initial data, but for actual mutations, for actually putting data, what you really use is something called server actions, the thing we'll discuss eventually, but it's good to know, or, a lot of times you will create routes and simple HTTP routes as well. So yeah. Should you prefer ORMs or just Postgres? Depends really, ORM's personal preference, just easier. 1 more minute guys and we'll proceed. Why did you not write use client in the button is an interactive element? I probably did write. And if I forgot, then I forgot I should write. I did write use client. Signup.tsx does have use client at the top. Any more questions? Use router, okay. One more thing I did not discuss very well in the last slide. Let's quickly discuss it for people who are interested. Over here I said, where did I say this? Yeah. So I said, okay, you can, what will happen usually when you're on the sign up page? You are on the sign up page. Then when you click on this button, your sign up happens and then you get redirected back to whatever, the landing page. That happens, right? If I go to facebook.com, if I'm able to log in, click on login, I get redirected somewhere else. If this was a successful login, I get redirected to my feed. How can you do the same thing in Next.js? And the answer is over here, but generally the answer is in using the use router hook. What you can do is import use router from next/navigation. This is important. There is another use router that exists in, I don't know, next.history or something. Make sure you're importing it from next/navigation. Then do a const router. So this is the hook that you can use to navigate the user on a button click. You create a router object using the use router hook. And then you can simply do router.push/ let's say. Make sure you're awaiting this specific function so that when the user does sign up, you just send them to the landing page. That's all that the use router hook did. So if I go back here now to the sign up page, click on sign in. As you can see, the user reached the landing page. I was able to take the user from the sign in page to the landing page. How? By using the use router hook. That's just something extra that's present on slide 7. All right. How many of us have a database URL? Because if we don't, then it'll be problematic. Do we have a database URL? Yes or no? 75. Yeah, I can wait for another minute, but then let's proceed. It's not too difficult. Go to Neon Tech, sign up or sign in, and just create a fresh database. As you can see, I have many. Just click on a new project, create a database, or go to Avian and create a database. Just wait for 1 more minute and then we'll proceed. How do crawlers will make sure website index if the application, that's a beautiful question. If the website has a loader initially, so how will the crawler know, okay, this is, this is a page and this is where static site generation comes into the picture. When you are, so if I go to app.100xdevs.com, your question is great. If you have a loader over here, how will the website know, okay, the user has these 5 courses or 6 courses? That is true. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but static site generation is one such thing. Okay? For pages like these, if you know, okay, is going to only have 6 courses for a long time, you can generate them statically. You can generate them when you're building the website so that app.100xdevs.com, when the user comes or whatever, after they're logged in or the crawler comes, they never even get the loader, because the next server doesn't need to hit the backend. It already has this page statically generated. That's one way to get rid of it. I've pretty much thought of the same issue. What do you compromise? Either a loader or, a crawler being able to understand your website. And the answer is, for these pages, for this page, the crawler needs to really understand it. And also I don't add courses as often, so you can statically generate this page. That does happen on this website, by the way. So if you go to Daily Code website, let me quickly show you, it has, let's say 12 pages, right? But if I go to Firebase and let's say I hide one of these tracks, if I go to the console and actually hide one of these, one of these tracks, the way to do that, this uses the Firebase database. If I go here and hide a track, let's say the Next.js track. The way to do that is, just set visible to false. Even though I've set visible to false, you will notice the website still has 12 tracks. Why? Because this page is statically generated. This page shouldn't have a loader. This page needs to have these 12 values so Google can index them. Anything inside can have loaders. As you can see, this has a loader. So that's the short answer to your question. It's a good question. It's a very good question, that I thought when I was creating this website. All right. Irrespective of whether or not you have a database now, we will have to proceed. Let's quickly go through this and then we'll open it up. This is the last slide we'll go through today. All right. Prisma installation is fairly straightforward. It's the same as a Node.js application. So step number 1, install Prisma, npm install Prisma. Step number 2, npx Prisma init, which again, if you have done Prisma with me before, this is just the standard way to generate a Prisma /schema.prisma file, this file right here. Step number 3, define your model. Let me open them side by side. Again, what are the steps? Step number 1, npm install Prisma. Step number 2, npx Prisma init. Then you should have a schema.prisma file in your code base. Now define your model. Define how your data would look like, which in our case is a simple user's model who has a username and a password. That's it. No addresses, no fancy first name, last name. You can make it fancy, but to kick things off, a simple schema, ID, which is an integer, which is the primary key, which by default auto increments, username, which is a string, password, which is a string. Cool. Very basic schema. You can also copy and paste it, or you can write it yourself. This is how you define schema generally in Prisma. I'm hoping this is straightforward. Next up, the most important thing here, replace .env with your own database. So if you remember in Prisma, it gets the URL from the .env file. You can hard code the URL. You can paste it here. Or generally, what should you do? You should see a .env file in your code base. This one right here. You should open this .env file and replace your database URL over here. Now here is where you need to put your database URL that you got from Avian or from Neon Tech. I will put mine. You should put yours. So I'm going to copy my database URL and paste it over here. The way to copy it is just this specific URL. You'll find a similar one on neon.tech. If you are on neon.tech, make sure you're unhiding the password and then copying it. So if you, let's say this is your database, don't copy the whole thing like this. Just click on the copy button. As you can see, it has stars over here. So make sure you either click on this I button and then see the password and then copy it, or just use this copy button right here. If you're on Avian, then just copy by clicking this button right here. Once you've done that, replace it in this .env file. And what's the next step? It is to migrate your database, actually create the tables in your database. You can run this command and you can replace the message with whatever you want, or you can, just stick with what I have here. npx Prisma migrate dev will actually migrate your database, actually create tables in your Postgres database. It is asking me, should I delete your data because I already had migrated a different database? I'm going to say yes. If it asks you the same thing, do it. It will most probably not ask you this question if this is the first time you've created the database. And if it works fine, you should see something like this: generated Prisma client, 0 vulnerabilities, created the migration folder. If you do see some error, then you'll see it right here. All right. Finish the sign up route. Oh, before that, you probably should generate the client. So after you have migrated your database, what is the next thing you do? These are standard things that are done in a Prisma application. You migrate your database, then you generate the client. And then it's as simple as any other Node.js application. There is nothing new here. There are some optimizations that you make that we'll see here in step 11. But before we reach step 11, it's as simple as going to your route handler, which in our case is this user route, and where is the import over here? We don't have an import over here. So this is a little incorrect. Import Prisma client from @Prisma, so @Prisma /client, and then const client equal to new Prisma client. Just like you initialize Prisma usually, you can pretty much initialize it and you're good to go. You can do like a user client dot user dot create data username body dot username password, what password. So basically, it's exactly the same as any Node.js application, nothing new. Every step of the way was the same. Installing Prisma, initializing using npx Prisma install, npx Prisma init, then defining your model, then replacing your database URL, then migrating the database, generating your client, and then just using your client. The only thing that's missing here is how the client is initialized, which is like this, just how we did it in the Node.js application, nothing new. Is this straightforward? We haven't yet checked if it works, but is the post endpoint straightforward? Feel free to ignore the get endpoint for now. But do we understand how to initialize Prisma? I'm assuming this is nothing new and something we have done many times now in a Node.js application. And the steps are exactly the same. All right, beautiful. I mean, beautiful-ish, 85%. Cool. Let's test if this works and then I'll open it up. There are 3 more slides to go through. I'll probably recap everything from here in an offline video and cover a few more things this week. But let me just make sure this runs. So if you write npm run dev, if you go to the sign up page, if you try to log in the first time, it will let you. That probably means I should have an await over here. Let me try that one more time. It happened very quickly, which is why I realized I need to have an await over here. Let me create an account for harkirat@gmail.com and some password, sign up. No errors, which basically means it worked. If I try to do the same thing again, the same email again, it'll still work, right? I forgot one thing. When I was defining my schema, I need to make sure the username is unique. I need to make sure no 2 people can exist with the same username. Let me re-migrate my Prisma database. Just making this unique, making sure no 2 people can have the same username. And then you don't need to regenerate the client because this changes nothing, but still fine. And now if I sign up, it says error. If I change the email and sign up, still did not happen. Let's see what's up. Oh, it's not running. My bad. npm run dev. Just making sure the sign up process works and the data is reaching the database. So if I try to create a user with this email, it fails because this user already exists. But if I try it with a random email, it does work. So now we have the unique constraint as well, which is something I forgot, but it was in the slides, I think. As you can see, username was unique. And now the sign up works, which means the things are reaching our database. Everything else we will cover in an offline video. You want a preview of what's coming? Yeah, it's just something that someone asked in chat as well. A better way to fetch data. You don't need to create a bunch of these routes. How do you do that? An extra thing to know if you're using Prisma with Next.js. And then finally something called server actions. This we'll discuss maybe from here in an offline video. But let me take a pause over here and open chat. How are we doing? Let me just do a poll first. And then it's only going to be Q&A from here. There are a few slides I missed. You can go through these slides. A lot of it is like pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, I'm going to open chat for now and answer a few questions. All right. Good. Great. 86% is great. But I'm going to open chat and answer questions now. And again, feel free to drop off if you don't have any questions. That's all for this week. I'll see you guys next week. And let's see if we can cover all of next in offline videos so we can move to the Paytm project in Next.js very soon. All right. Lots of questions. Keep them coming. All right. Getting this error. Let's see. Component definition is missing display name. Just add a name over here. Export default function. Put a name after that. You're probably using a version of Node.js that's enforcing you to give it a name. So try giving it a name over here. And then I think it should work. So replace this with export default function and then add a name over here, call it like sign up or something. All right. A lot to digest in learning React. Is it? I thought this is pretty. I thought yesterday was a lot to digest. I thought today would have been straightforward, but I don't know. Maybe it is. So today we have not done much. We've only understood loaders. Yesterday we did a lot of things, especially if you're coming. I don't know. Either way, we took a pause and then I'll cover all of it in offline videos. Notion doc. Can we use SQLite instead of Prisma? You can use SQLite. You can use MongoDB. You can use Drizzle, whatever you want. Okay. Now we can answer this FOMO question. No Mumbai meetup. There'll be one Bangalore. Any tips for becoming library? Framework independent dev. I used React in the past, but not for my company. I couldn't get a chance to. I'm not a framework independent dev. As in, if I had to move to Angular today, my life would be a miserable, or try Java today, it'll be very hard. So I think it's very hard for everyone to do it. So don't feel pressured into being like you will always start from the bottom if you use Angular, for example. What do you think about Angular? Don't ask me bad. I only think bad things about Angular, basically. Whenever I see a code base, I just tell the company, no, bhai, nahi ho payega mere se to. I'm working Angular developer with basic understanding of backend development. Okay, that's a very long question to answer right now. So let me move on to other questions for now. General doubts. How much a developer is capable of getting as a fresher according to, okay, so these are little generic questions. Let me answer some class-based questions and then come to this. How to write a protected route. So if a user is not logged in, she is not allowed. This is exactly what you will get in the middleware section. In fact, this is exactly, so if you want to read about it yourself and choose some class and learn better, if you go to app.100steps.com now and you try to log in, let's say I log in, I create 2 sessions basically. What you're asking is pretty similar to what I'm going to do now, which is, if I, let's say, log in here in another session. Now I want to make sure the original person that was logged in gets logged out. What do you want? You want if a route is protected, a page is protected, user should get redirected. Let me open a course over here. When I open a course, you will see I got redirected to /signin. So a very similar use case is already implemented in the code. In fact, even this is already implemented in the code. If I'm logged out and go to /courses/3, it takes me back to the sign in page. So you can read about it over there, but I'll also, discuss this over here. Yeah. They're both separate implementations. The way that you get redirected here versus like on /courses/1 is a little different from how you get redirected on the other one. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. How to write? Okay, answer that. But yeah, please check out this Notion. Okay, we'll come to this. How to fix this? Database, PostgreSQL, default DB, public schema, this thing cannot reach database. It seems like you cannot reach your database, which does happen. So it happened for me as well. When I was in a specific hotel, I was not able to connect to my database. And the reason usually is the port that you're hitting, right? As you can see, the port you're hitting is 17208. I'm talking to you, Dhruv. And usually, a lot of these hotel Wi-Fi or sometimes even your own Wi-Fi might not allow you to connect to a port like this. So what you can do is either run Postgres locally or try from a different Wi-Fi. It's not your fault. It's just, the database that you have is, your network is not able to connect to it. And it happens with me as well. So yeah. All right. So I'm going to ask for a quick recap. Let me take you through slide 1 to slide 9. Slide 1, I introduced, you can do backends in Next.js also. Slide number 2, I recapped how can you do data fetching in React? How does an Axios request go out in React? The waterfalling problem was there. Step number 3, I showed the same thing in Next.js. How can you send data from your Next.js server? How can your Next.js server talk to another backend service and return completely rendered page to the front end? Number 4, how do you add skeletons and loaders in Next.js? Step number 5, introducing API routes in Next.js. Introducing how you can start to write backends in Next.js. Then we moved on to writing a backend route of our own. Then we created a simple front end for a sign up page. Then we wrote the sign up for a backend page that was very rudimentary. And then finally we introduced databases so we can actually put some data in a database. That's the recap for today. Still have to do a few more things and then a bunch of other offline videos. Socket.io when? Never. We probably will do raw WebSocket. We'll probably not do Socket.io, but that's part of 1-200. So first we need to cover Next.js and then Docker and then the Paytm project and then after that. But yeah, do you know SquareX? I don't. From first principles, I understand it's just a simple wrapper about Docker. I don't know what SquareX is. I've heard of. Do you mean this? This doesn't look. Do you mean this? No, you have to link me to it too. In client-side rendering, can we lazily load components where a component is dependent on fast API is not blocked because the component is dependent on slow API? How do we handle this in the server-side rendering? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think so I did see this somewhere in Next.js. It's a good question. Okay, how can you partially return? Next.js does provide you this. Like I mean, I saw a diagram which makes me think this is possible, but let's see. Loading UI and streaming. The special file loading, instant loading states. Streaming. This is probably what you need. I could be wrong. Let me read about this. Purely based on this UI, I saw that I realized, yeah, this might be what you want. In addition to loading users, you can manually create suspense boundaries for your UI components, and App Router supports streaming with suspense. What you basically want is you want to stream your data from the backend, right? Okay, here comes the first data, and then here comes some more data, and here comes some more data. So most probably this is what will let you do what you're asking to do. But let me read through it, or I would urge you to read through it, and I will also cover this in the offline video. Good question. Please show me how to make authenticated routes in front end as well. Let me show you quickly how. So you can go, as I showed, it happens on the website. So if you go to app/courses/page.tsx. No, not this. Course ID/page.tsx. You will see on the top. There you go. We check if the user has access, and if they don't, we call this redirect function that takes them to the sign-in page. So create your async course function, check over here, does the user have access? And if they don't, then just redirect them to whatever route you think the user should be redirected to. And this redirect comes from next/navigation. I'm thinking of creating a library. As I caught up with the cohort library to convert Notion record map to PDF, which I'm using in the Daily Code website, which I teach you to go through TypeScript or Next.js or not. Cloudflare pages allow Next.js. It's a long question. I'm thinking of creating a library. As I caught up with the cohort, the library will convert Notion record map to PDF, that's a good library. I get what you're building. It'll basically just convert Notion pages to a PDF or whatever you're saying. A PDF, yeah. So what tech should I use? Basic. So here, I don't think you need any of the TypeScript or the React or Next.js. You actually need, whatever is the easiest way to create PDF files, which might be C++. Unless you want to first convert it to a website and then PDFify the website. If you want to, ideally, what you should do, you should have a PDF renderer. You need to create a PDF renderer. So if I had to do this, I would do this in whatever is the easiest language to create a PDF in, which might just be, C, C++, Python, I don't know. Cloudflare have pages which allow Next.js and React. So instead of Vercel, should we go? Yeah, you can use Cloudflare pages. Whatever is the cheapest. Is it cheap? I'll look at the pricing, and if it's cheap, you should go with it. Doesn't really matter where your website is deployed. Can't we use hooks same as React for loading? You can still use hooks for loading and have suspense boundaries on the client. The reason we did all of this was since we wanted to make sure the HTML that's coming from the backend actually has the data hydrated. Do we not use data fetching libraries like React Query, Next.js? I don't know. Probably can. So the thing is, most of the data you get directly in the async route, right? So for example, as you can see, if you go to app.100xdev.com, and if you're logged in, the courses that you see, we actually get them directly over here. We don't in this get courses function, which is a function that exists on the server. So you don't need to send any API routes. So you might not need, any library that gives you fancy fetches. Yeah, all the data that you need. Yeah, basically this project does not use any query library. You can do everything here. Is there any case in which I feel you need a query library if you're using Next 13 the way we are? Can't think of it. Yeah, I think you're good without it. I mean, you can add it if there's, if you want to do some certain fetches, you want to defer to the client, then you can add it. But if you want to do everything on the server like we're doing here, or like we did in the class today, then you don't need a fancy library. Does a singleton make sense for Cloudflare workers? What does that mean? Does a singleton make sense for Cloudflare workers? Does creating a singleton for what makes sense for Cloudflare workers? Could you repeat the question, elaborate a bit? Issue in use router. Yeah, if you're seeing this issue, most probably this is what you've done. When you were importing the use router hook, you pressed enter and it imported for you by default from next/router. You need to import it from next/navigation and use that. That's probably the error that you're seeing. I have contributed to an open source project for around 2 months and I have made around 25 plus PRs. Message the founder with a humble number. He had good feedback on my contribution, but I didn't want to hire in the time zone greater than +4 GMT. What should I do? I tried to find someone. Okay, you can do a few things. You can move to a different country, probably a little bit of a stretch. You can try to convince them. GMT +4 is not too far from India, right? You can try to convince them that I stay up late. I mean, that's the only thing you can do, right? But if they really want it, there's not much you can do. But I would, if you have so much value of 25 PRs, I would still push a bit. I do work US hours, and considering you're open to working US hours. How to create multiple post routes in the same file? How do we not use pooled connection next? You don't need the. Yeah, good question. Great question. For the pooled connection, you don't need Prisma Accelerate for pooled connections anymore because you're not deploying this on. Okay, there are two types of pooled connections. The one pooled connection that we saw until now, which was we were deploying on a Cloudflare worker. And if you're deploying it here, then you need a pooled connection from Prisma Accelerate. This service, you need to use their pooled connection. But if you're deploying a Next.js application on, let's say, Vercel, or on another edge network like Netlify, then also it is a good idea for you to create a pooled connection. But this pooled connection you can get from here, or you can directly get from Neon as well. If you go to neon.tech, you will notice when you log in and open a database, it says pooled connection over here. If you select this, it gives you a pooled connection URL. You can use this directly in Next.js. And this is actually a good idea to use if you're deploying your application on Vercel or on Netlify, which are called edge networks, which start multiple instances. In that case, you do need it. If you're deploying it on EC2, then you don't need it because you don't have multiple instances. You don't have multiple things trying to connect to that database. Everything seems to fit in the place and understood, but struggling with design, CSS and styling of the website, like how to structure the code base and components, how to approach and get better. So there are only 5-6 things you need to know very well, which is how to center something, how to create a responsive website, by which I mean, if it's like this, then they go one below the other. These are the important things to know. Other than that, a bunch of design is, just copying. For example, if you want to create something like this, you copy the CSS from here into your website, or, whenever you're creating designs, you have a Figma file to work out of, you can yank those CSS from here. There are only like 5 things that you need to know very well, which is, how to create an app bar, which is a common thing that happens. How to make sure the app bar is fixed at the top. How do you create a sidebar and, have the sidebar sort of a thing? If you make it small, how does the sidebar go away? How do you create a hamburger icon? These are logics you have to sort of revise or, memorize for a bit. Everything else is just, if you know these 5 things, how to place things, how to create grids, how to change grids as the width changes, then everything else is just CSS you copy paste usually. Like the actual style is something you copy paste. Second question is, after Next, can we consider 2 stacks that we can work with, React plus Express and Next.js? Yeah, you can say that you can create apps in React plus Express. You can create app in Next.js. 2 stacks. Well, you can say that. I'm thinking of creating a library as I caught up with the cohort and the library will convert. Okay, answered that. Can't we? Okay, answered that. We had 2 doubts. Let's see. Push code. Let me push the code. Yeah. Let me first push the. Is it already present? Let's see. Oh God. Okay, it's present on the 100x steps code to organization. I'm pasting a link as well. All right. Yeah. Okay, there you go. Doubt. Okay, there you go. But yeah, I've deployed the to-dos backend application in Azure and VM and run the code PM2 and it gives you HTTP. How do you secure this? Great question. You use something called certbot, which is something I think we discussed. Maybe we missed this during the EC2 class at the end. But if you go to project100xapps.com, deploying to EC2 servers, at the end, you will find a slide on certificate management. Oh, there's nothing here. I think we forgot to cover this, but I'll cover it in an offline video. Here you can select how are you deploying your application. What's your proxy? Is it Nginx? That's what we discussed. Hopefully that's what you're using. I don't know. And then where are you running this? Let's say Ubuntu. And then it will give you all the instructions to run a few commands that will basically generate a certificate for you and put it in your Nginx file. Yeah, so basically go through this, but I'll cover it in an offline video as well. All right, what is the other doubt? Okay, answer that. So yeah, you're right over here. You just have to create a certificate which you have not created right now. And why does this error come always? Webpack. This is a warning, unable to resolve dependencies. No idea, I'll have to Google it. Let's see. Maybe try updating your node version. I don't see it, which basically means, you'll have some resolved with deleting .next and then running yarn. Can you try doing this? Try deleting the .next folder. And that's how you Google and answer questions, like figure out things like these, by the way. All right. Let's open chat one more time. Will folks get discounted price for 1 to 100 lectures? Yeah, you could just ping Rookie. He'll give you something. If you already bought 0 to 1, it's easy to upgrade to 1 to 100. Let's see. Notion docs. Notion docs are the easiest way to get your question answered, by the way. Can we use auth in a way that makes loading.tsx for multiple files? I would assume so. Try it out. Yeah, just try it out. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer from the top of my head, but I would assume so. npm run build, permission denied. When you run build, let's see, permission denied. Eesh. Sudo npm run build, password, permission denied. Seems like you're on a Mac machine, sir. You can try doing something which someone says it. If you are on a Mac machine running in the command prompt, try downloading git bash for Windows. This will give you a terminal. Try running the commands there. But let me Google this error for you really quickly. Ubuntu permission denied. Next npm run. So what I can tell is npm run builds creates a folder, and Windows is probably not letting Node create that folder. This looks like you're on a Windows, like not on a Windows machine, on an Ubuntu machine. Okay, never mind. Permission denied. This is for React. Potentially run next bit under a different user than next start. Nah, this isn't it. Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. You probably want to change the permissions on your folder. That's what I originally guessed as well. Yeah, just try to change permissions on the folder that you're in. You probably just don't have permissions to create another folder there. That's why the build command is failing. That's my guess. In our local next folder, there is no source folder, but in your GitHub there is source folder. What is the difference? It's just a better way to structure. When you're creating your application, when you run create next app, it asks you at the CDC. It asks, I'll create next application. It asks you, would you like to use the SRC directory? Would you like to put all the code in an SRC directory, the source directory from where you want to, where you'll have your code? I selected yes over here. That's why the GitHub has a source directory. Will you be using Next.js only in one class? No, not really. No. We'll use simple backends. We'll use Node.js. I prefer using React. I do prefer using React Express, sir. I share the feeling. I'm more comfortable with them as well. You need to know React if you want to get full stack applications. If you want to, dive into eventually Kafka, whatever things we'll dive into, we don't need. Next, we'll probably stick to Express plus React. Please read this Notion doc. Okay, let me read the Notion docs now. So I answered these 3 questions. Let me answer this one now. I am an Angular developer with basic backend knowledge. I haven't been able to attend any sessions 0 to 1. While attending classes, I sometimes find myself getting bored because I already know some of these details. Makes sense. In such cases, I prefer to learn through projects, videos like the one for Medium Clone and Vercel Clone. However, I also feel I might be missing out on important information in classes. I think your approach is fine. If you can build projects, that's all you need to know. And if you want to skim through videos, you can. All videos have like segments. Just skim through the things you don't know. I think I answered the rest of them already. Let's see. Something's wrong. Question. In the case of MongoDB, I get URLs from MongoDB Atlas. I use that MongoDB Compass and where I created multiple databases on different projects. URL DB1, URL DB2. Okay. How do I do the same with Postgres? A single URL but multiple databases to work with different pages instead of rewriting it for every new project. It seems like what you want is to create multiple databases on the same URL. That's what you want, right? You cannot do that on Neon Tech or some service like this. You now need to own your whole. You need to own the server on which you're running it. You basically want to create multiple databases. I don't know if there's an easy way to do it here. Let's see if you can create a different database over here. But when you're running it locally, you can. You can create multiple databases if you deploy your own Postgres server. If you want to use a service like this, Neon, then I'm not sure if it's very easy to do. Does anyone know if there's an easy way to create multiple databases in, like, when you're getting it as a managed service from AVN or from, there's not, right? Yeah. So yeah, you either deploy your own thing. Why do you want this? Like, why are you so strict? I want multiple databases. Usually what companies do is they have multiple tables. So the same database will have 100 tables, some for one application, some for another application. That is one pattern I've seen. I've not seen, companies being very finicky. Need database one for one application, and the other database needs to have, run on the same host. This is never really a requirement. Why do you have this requirement? I'm just curious. All right. FOMO out. SquareX is a Chrome extension that makes disposable file viewers and browsers, which allow you to, is it like, okay, got it. From first principle, I think, okay, so I'm not going to install an extension, but let me see what they've written. So it seems similar to a wrapper around Docker container, which also like sandbox environment. So pretty sure they don't run Docker. You can't really run Docker in a browser. So they're not running, they are sandboxing somehow. They're not using Docker. There's no way for you to run Docker inside a browser. What they might be doing is running. So this is what I get from, is this like, what's that browser called? The Tor browser. It, creates a browser session, but it's not running locally. It's running someplace else. It's probably running someplace else, which means there might be a Docker container, but that Docker container might be running someplace else, or, whatever, a different isolated environment. That's what my thoughts are. It does not run Docker in my browser is I guess what I'm saying, if that's your question. Next request and next response. Good question. If you would Google, it will tell you, but they're just abstraction on top of the default, request that you get. So By default, you get this request object that's present, in the, probably not in the like ECMAScript spec, but you'll find it in the console as a web API and also in Node.js. Next request and next responses are just, written on top of it. Basically extend them, basically add a few functions on top. So you can use this request object directly as the type, or you can use next request. This is just, an extension of this, by which I mean, it extends this class and adds some more things on top. Having 4 years of experience as a system design engineer, non-coding side, and wanted to transition into developer role. Okay, system engineer. I'm unsure if my experience is considered. It will probably not be considered, but I can tell you experience. I mean, so here's the thing. Your experience is not going to help you in the sense that you haven't learned much, so you will not, be a real senior engineer when you get to coding. But you can twist your experience, at least in the resume. On paper, you have 4 years of experience, so that benchmark goes away. If a company is looking for a senior engineer or an experienced engineer, you are that. But make sure your skills match that of a person who's been working for 4 years. I am unsure if my experience will be considered. Okay, answer that. How to enter dev. So the only advice is, make sure you actually have experience of 4 years when it comes to coding, which basically means, write out of project code like a senior engineer. You already have the experience that will make it easy for you to get shortlisted, that, not a lot of people might not be able to. How can you use open source projects with MIT license to build businesses around them ethically and legally? MIT to sahi wala hota hai na? What's up here? Something is up on my machine. Say MIT license. I mean, so if, I guess your question is, if an open source project has a very restrictive license, how do I make a business on top of it? The answer is you cannot. That's how law works. If someone has a shop, how can I go in there and steal their stuff? You cannot, right? So you cannot. You can inspire your code from it. We probably can't even do that. But yeah, you if they have a restrictive license, they do, and you cannot do anything about it. You shouldn't even try. Does create next app use Vite under the hood? No. So Vite, create, React app are all bundlers people had created for React. They do the conversion of React to JavaScript. Next has its own compiler, its own thing, does not depend on Vite. They've written their own, compiler that, converts actually the TSX to JavaScript. Everything's okay. Answer that. Can't we use hooks the same as React? Okay, answer that. Okay, let's open one more time, guys. All right. Joke of the day for winning bounty. Okay, let's see. Teacher, बादाम खाने से क्या होता है? Me. बादाम खत्म हो जाते हैं. I don't know if it's worth the bounty, but it was funny, made me laugh. This Notion doc is closed. Javel G. Keep sending more. If you send more, might give a bounty. I mean, not today, but like some other class. Okay, Javaji, the Notion doc is closed. How to delete contents rows from a table in NeonDB database. How to delete? Oh, yeah. So you can do this. Neon.tech. I mean, you can run it locally, but they give you a very fancy SQL editor. So just go here, click on SQL editor, and write your, delete star from, delete from whatever your table name is. Click on run. It will delete everything from that table. Chat. Is it a good time to start learning Web3? If yes, do I need to learn Rust? What types would suffice? Are the resources that you shared in the Notion doc enough? The resources I shared are enough. I don't know if they're enough, but like they're for Solana, which is, one specific blockchain. The question really is, like, how many blockchains do you want to target? Do you want to? So ETH has the most opportunities. Maybe not today. Maybe ETH and Solana have the most opportunities today. For Sol, I shared a path. ETH path is pretty straightforward, as in, do a lot of Solidity. Do you need Solidity and Rust? Maybe not. You can get a good job or a decent job by being just a TypeScript engineer. You might do a lot of Rust, a lot of Solidity, and still might not be able to get in. So it's a lot on being very focused on helping a company. And if a company needs TypeScript, you create TypeScript. What if you want to deploy your own Postgres? Which service could be? If you want to deploy your own Postgres, then don't do it. If you're thinking of doing it, just deploy it on whatever, a cloud provider, get a bunch of servers on AWS, make sure you have replication, make sure you have, more than 2 machines. If one machine goes down, you have it in a different place. Ideally, if you're doing it, do it in a multi-cloud fashion, which means you have one server in GCP, one server in AWS. If AWS goes down, your data is persisted, because, something to keep in mind if you're creating a database or like self-hosting database. Generally, don't self-host a database. For fresher learners like me, decision to choose tech to do practice is getting a little confusing. Like if we learned Mongo, then Postgres, React, then Next.js, and so on. I mean, how much do I need to learn to move to next tech? So do we need to, so I guess your question is, when do I know if I can move from Next.js to, I don't know, HTMX, or, I guess to Web3 or AI? The answer is when you can build most projects. If there's a website that you see and you can build it just by looking at it, then is when you can move to the more fancy technology. Don't hop from one technology to another unless you can look at any website and create that. In fact, today send you a link to, not like Google, build Google, but basic full stack application you should be able to build in whatever stack you're comfortable with, be it React plus Node, be it Next.js. If you're Kushal, if you're getting this error right here, you are most probably doing this. When you wrote Prisma client, you got the default import, which came from @prisma/client/extensions. You want to import from @prisma/client, which is why we're seeing that error. Where do tables exist in AVN? Well, they exist in your database. If you go to, this is a small mini database that they've created for you, right? So in that database, they have tables. Where do tables exist? I'm confused by your question, sir. All right, let's do it one more time and then we'll call it. Oh, I haven't opened chat, sorry. All right. I remember you saying once it's not feasible for you to accept course payment in crypto, and can Sol pay? We do accept, we can accept it. I just said it's very hard to do. There's no good payment gateway is what I said, but you can always accept. Like laptop giveaway kar do apna. I don't know about that. What are we doing in the next class? If we cover all of Next in offline videos, then we'll do Docker. If not, then we'll do some more Next. I was hired as an ST intern in a good MNC, stipend 30K, compensation 30K. So eventual compensation 21 lakh base and 13 CTC. Okay. Still, sorry, didn't understand the comp very well. I'm a little confused, doesn't matter. Still, they haven't converted me to full-time because of budget issues. Okay, so you're saying your full-time compensation would have been higher, but they're keeping you as an intern because as an intern, they have to pay you less. Was working on UI, but after lay off many QA people, I start to write Java automation. Currently learning backend here in DSA, practicing both after job hours. How much should I put on job bare minimum? How many hours should you put in your job enough to not get laid off? Seems like they're not converting you to a full-time job. And they never will unless you ask or try to ask in a humble fashion, is it happening? Or if I'm staying an intern, can you bump up my salary a bit, considering there is some dependency on you in the end? It matters how much dependency, they have on you, how much you are needed in the company, I guess. But generally, if a company is not, converting you from intern to a full-time employee, they will defer this conversation as much as possible. So make sure you're starting that conversation. The sign-up parent page does not need to be client side, but the sign-up component being a child, how does it work and not crash? The sign-up parent page do not need to be client side, but the sign-up component being a child is client. How does it work and not crash? So server and client side components. If you remember, this is what the chart was, right? The clients are at the end. The parents can be server. The client, the final thing that needs to use a use effect or needs to use a button handler needs to be a client. So that is the right pattern. The parent can be server. The Sign a parent do not need to be client side. Exactly. The parent can be a server, but the actual child component needs to be a client component. I ran Postgres through Docker. It already has some tables, but using the command drop says the table does not exist. Why? Let's see. Oh, wrap them in double quotes. That's 99% the issue. If you have a capital U, right, you have to wrap it in double quotes when you're running drop queries, a bunch of other queries. Hi Harkirat, I am working remotely for a US-based startup, and my company is asking me to come on a B1 visa. They will sponsor, but I have to apply from my side. Research and talk to agents a bit. Is it common to come on B1 visa? How do you get there? Need some guidance. So, number one, B1 is a business visa, so you cannot work there technically. I don't know if they're asking you to come to work. If they're asking you to come for vacation, yes, B1 is the standard visa. A lot of people get a B1 visa and go and work there as well. I did as well. Whenever I am in the US, I'm sort of working, even though I'm on a B1, B2 visa. It's not technically legal. You're not supposed to work on a business visa, it's fine, but B1, B2 is business and tourism. If you're just getting a B1, make sure you're declaring you're here for business, and then you can work, but there's some restrictions. You can only stay there for 6 months. All that jazz. I think the line for B1 is really long. So you'll have to pay like some agent 50,000 rupees or something. They'll get you in the line. And yeah, B1 is the right visa basically. Yeah, that's what I have as well. Cool. Just, I think I answered that. Notion. AI versus Web3 in one word. Web3. Personal preference. But take your pick, but Web3 for me. Okay, I guess that's it. Can you walk us through the code for CMS and Dailycode website? Sure. Dailycode uses Firebase, so maybe not Dailycode, but we can do CMS. How does the React frontend authenticate to the backend to fetch the user's details? How does the React? What if you want to build API auth, and how will Axios send credentials? So maybe you've not gone through the classes, but the way the backend authenticates the frontend is the frontend sends a token in every request, especially a request when it's trying to access a privileged endpoint. So if you're hitting an endpoint that gives you your courses, you need to send in a token, and that token is what authenticates you on the server. Look at the Paytm project, look at the Medium project. We've done the same thing in both the places. Alrighty guys, let's call it here. Thank you for joining. Next week, we will try to start Docker, hope to start Docker. I'll try to finish Next.js this week in offline videos. If not, we'll do some more next week. With that, let's end it. Thank you for sticking for a long time today, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye. See you next week.